Because I assure you, I did not win tonight. We won. We won. I have been critiqued along this campaign for being too radical, being too bold. They ain't seen nothing yet.
Welcome back. That was Pennsylvania State Representative Chris Rabb last night after he won his primary to be the Democratic nominee in the state's 3rd congressional district. It is a major win for progressives in what is considered the nation's bluest House district. Joining me now is Pennsylvania State Representative Chris Rabb. Thank you so much for joining me. Great to see you.
Likewise.
And we should say we, of course, know each other. I'm from Philly, so we have a lot of contacts in common. Really appreciate your being on the program. I want to ask you about this victory last night. It's being viewed as a major win for progressives, and I wonder, what message do you hope it sends to the Democratic establishment and, quite frankly, the rest of the country?
Well, I think even beyond the progressive label, what it suggests and what it actually affirms is grassroots organizing and people-powered campaigns that rebuke corporate PAC money is something that resonates with not just the base of the Democratic Party, but those folks who do not feel seen or heard by the party. So new folks, young folks, certainly progressives, but other folks who are just tired of entrenched politics and establishment politics. They want to see themselves in their leaders and in the platforms of those people who are running. And if they don't feel particularly compelled to come out to vote.
Well, let me ask you, because Governor Josh Shapiro, as you know, weighed in on several Pennsylvania primaries. Notably, he did not weigh in on yours. There was a report that the governor was trying to block your path to victory. Do you think that your brand of politics can be replicated in the swing districts in Pennsylvania, where the governor did weigh in, where Democrats are hoping to win in order to take back the House?
Yes. Well, first, there's no credible evidence that the governor tried to tank my campaign. I think that's pure speculation. And if he wanted to have his thumb on the scale, he could have endorsed any of my 3 opponents, and he didn't do it. I think he respected the politics of the race in Philadelphia, and he is prepared to work with the new Democratic nominee. He called me. I graciously accepted his congratulations. But the real work is, how do we make sure that the priorities of the Democratic Party resonate and, more importantly, are attuned to what the people closest to the pain want? And what we have is an intermediation of a donor class that is not reflective of the constituency and the electorate. So the things that are most important to the people who need to come out the most to have Democratic wins are the ones who feel least seen in the priorities of the current Democratic Party, which is why I believe I was able to get a plurality of the votes. I was able to get a plurality of Black voters, young voters, progressive voters. And so it was truly the broad diversity of one of the most diverse districts in the nation, one of the youngest. And I think it shows that when people see themselves in a campaign and understand that it's bigger than the candidate themselves, that anything is possible, and that's going to create a lot of enthusiasm.
And again, just to press on this point, I mean, Democrats are trying to win back the House. Obviously, all politics is local, so every candidate has to refine their own messaging based on who their constituents are. But do you think that your progressive message can be effective, can be a winning message when you step outside of a district that is reliably blue, that is a swing area, for example, and win over independents and win over people who you need to win in order to win back the House?
I don't think that regular working people and working families in suburbs and rural areas are in love with the Epstein class. I don't think they're in love with greedy corporations. I don't think they're in love with money infecting politics. All of the things that make their lives so much harder. Those are the things I'm fighting against. So I believe that this message will resonate far beyond ethnically diverse, very blue districts. And I am prepared to go anywhere and everywhere to lift up those messages of folks who want to be on the right side of history. And as a current state lawmaker in the largest full-time state legislature in the country, I have had the benefit of going to places around our Commonwealth, and those messages do in fact resonate with folks. It may not resonate with the donor class, but my interest is connecting with the people who decide who takes us to Washington, D.C.
Let me ask you, because you got the endorsement of Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. As you know, there is a lot of buzz about her political future. Do you see her and her brand of progressive politics as the future of the Democratic Party?
Absolutely. But I also feel that the things that she's uplifted in her leadership in Congress and many others, including my sister in service, Summer Lee, the first Black woman to be elected to Congress from Pennsylvania, these things resonate far beyond what we would call a progressive voting bloc. These whether it's universal health care or increasing the minimum wage or climate action or getting money out of politics, these are not inherently progressive ideas. Some of these things have been embraced by moderate Democrats, have been embraced by some Republicans as well over time. And I believe that the progressive label has some value, but it's not nearly as important as what are the things that are going to move our nation forward that address all communities and not just the left or the right. I think that's a challenging framework that is not necessarily accurate.
Let me ask you, if Democrats win back the House in November, do you have confidence in Leader Jeffries to lead the Democratic caucus to push through some of your priorities?
Well, my priorities will be the priorities of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, which endorsed me. Those are things that are, I believe, the type of policies that will help everyone. And I believe, from what I've seen, he will be receptive to that in a newly regained Democratic majority.
So if you, in fact, do win the general election, what will your priority be on day one? What will be the very first issue you will aim to tackle?
Well, we got to stop digging. We have to de-Trumpify, de-magify government as we know it. We have to stop the bleeding before we can do anything else. We do need to embrace a bold legislative agenda for this nation, but we have to stop the bleeding. We have to restore the cuts. We have to make sure that our own government isn't weaponized against the most vulnerable, and that definitely starts on day one.
Well, State Representative Chris Rabb, we will be tracking your campaign through November. We really appreciate your joining us. Congratulations. Please stay safe.
Thank you.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.